you ever had to take sides?
My father wanted me to get bar mitzvahed, and my mother, being an atheist, didn't want me to get bar mitzvahed, so I took my mother's side and I didn't get bar mitzvahed.
I guess probably the most recent one would be the war.
During wartime, people take different sides, different arguments, and they have different reasons for or against a war.
Once I had to take sides when my two friends were arguing over the outcome of a basketball game.
Once my friends were having a fight.
Two of my good friends.
My two best friends were in like a huge fight.
My grandmother passed away recently, and it brought up a lot of rivalries between my uncle and my dad, and all I could think to do was to try to mediate the situation.
And try to listen to both sides and just meet them both in the middle.
I try not to choose sides because when you do, especially with friends, you tend to show favoritism toward one and that can ruin relationships.
After World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States agreed to temporarily divide Korea along the 38th parallel. The northern half of the country was controlled by the Soviet Union. The southern half was a Republican administration under Dr. Syngman Rhee. What are some of the reasons that the Soviet Union would want to control North Korea? The North and South Korean governments kept an uneasy peace from 1945 to 1950. But in June 1950, Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Soviet Union, became eager to expand communist domination. He ordered North Korea's leader Kim Il-sung to unite the country under communism. On July 15, 1950, tanks rolled across the 38th parallel. "100,000 well-trained and well-armed combat troops swarm into the south, meeting little resistance from the South Korean army. The United States supported South Korea and its president Syngman Rhee. The Soviet Union funneled money and weapons into communist North Korea. President Harry S. Truman was afraid that the North Korean invasion was just the beginning of a Soviet plan to conquer the free world. He knew that the real threat was a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. The Security Council of the United Nations called an emergency session. The USSR chose not to attend, and their absence helped the United States, Britain, and France pass a resolution urging members to help South Korea defend itself against attack. On September 2, 1950, the Security Council appointed American General Douglas MacArthur to take command of all United Nations forces in Korea. The United Nations and South Korean forces had been suffering heavy losses. The North Koreans seemed unbeatable. But MacArthur rejected any talk of a need to withdraw. It was his character and determination that carried his troops.
We were informed that there would be no more retreats. That we would stand, hold our positions, no more withdrawals, and that if we had to, we'd have to die in that position. And that's the way it was stressed to us that we had to hold.
General MacArthur was able to change the entire course of the Korean War in just 2 short days. Communist China's chairman Mao Zedong believed that the United States' support for South Korea was part of an American scheme to expand itself into East Asia and perhaps China itself. To support his communist neighbors, Mao Zedong sent 250,000 Chinese troops into North Korea. When the United States saw North Korea's expanded manpower, the danger was undeniable. They faced the very real possibility of humiliating defeat. MacArthur's victory turned to devastation. When winter came on, conditions grew even worse.
I was absolutely stunned. I'd never seen Marines in that shape before. They were obviously in a lot of shock, not only from being overrun by the Chinese, but also from the cold. And there they were, without weapons, some of them barefooted, some of them in shorts, and they were damn near frozen stiff.
Just a few weeks earlier, General MacArthur guaranteed Truman that China would never enter the war. Now the Chinese had succeeded in driving all United Nations forces back below the 38th parallel. Frustrated, General MacArthur planned to expand the war into China, and he proposed using as many as 50 atomic bombs against the Chinese. There is no substitute for victory, he said, and that means all-out war with China. But Truman, afraid of bringing the Soviet Union into the war, said no. Why would the president be afraid of drawing the Soviet Union into a war? The president and the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon refused to listen to MacArthur's demands, and Truman, who at that time was Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, relieved General MacArthur of his command. By June of 1953, both North Korea and the United Nations forces stopped fighting at the 38th parallel, roughly the same point where the war had begun. Physically and emotionally spent, both sides agreed to a truce. North and South Korea agreed to a ceasefire on June 27, 1953. But 2 more years passed before all fighting ended in Korea. The United States fought the Korean War to prevent communism from spreading in Asia. U.S. soldiers continued to occupy South Korea long after the war. But today, most veterans remember 1953 as the year when they were finally able to return home.